Thought I'd do something a little bit different today. I thought I'd answer some questions and respond to some comments that you guys have had about all my various electric rideables and EVs. So the first one stems from a discussion I was having on my YouTube community tab about adding a lead acid based electric rideable to the mix. And the discussion turned to a e-bike. And I actually am looking at a Emo Hornet X with a sealed lead acid battery. I'd like to get one at some point. I just don't know when would be appropriate because I've got a full content calendar from here until the cows come home. But ideally at some point I would like to get a lead acid based e-bike because I would like to prove that lead acid chemistry still has a place in the age of lithium ion batteries. The second one is about my electric raft, and it's, do you need a license to operate a raft with the trolling motor? And the answer is yes. Even though it's just a tiny little electric motor, as soon as you stick any sort of powered motor on the back of a boat in Canada, you need to have a boating license called a Pleasurecraft operator card in order to use it. This one is about my Model 3, specifically about the trip I just went on where I drove all the way from basically Toronto to Halifax and back. That's about 3,500 kilometers. And they're wondering what the total cost of supercharging was. So keep in mind, it was me, my wife, and we had the car absolutely full of gear in the back. We had a whole bunch of stuff we probably didn't need to bring. We had a table, we had 2 chairs, we had not only all of our clothes and suitcases, but we also had some for our friends and my mother-in-law, both who were flying down and didn't want to pay the luggage fees for the plane. So all of that was in the car, and the drive all the way out there, the 2 times we charged out there, and then our drive back, the grand total in supercharging cost was $304 Canadian. Another one about my Model 3, what gauge of wire was I using for my extension cable for portable charging? So the big yellow extension cord that I have in my charging kit is rated for 15 amps, but the Tesla will only ever pull up to 12 amps off a standard wall outlet. So it'll get warm, but it's not going to get to the point of overheating and melting unless there's a defect with the cord. This is another one about my electric raft. How does the raft do over rocks? Because the raft has a flat bottom, the actual amount that it sticks into the water isn't that much. This thing will float with all of my gear and the motor up. I could probably get by with just a few inches if I'm being completely honest. And in fact, when I'm putting in and taking out my raft, it'll float pretty much in ankle deep water. When I do have the motor deployed though, that needs at least a foot of water so that the propeller has room to spin, but that's super easy to pop up and get out of the way if I'm in super shallow water. As for bottoming out the boat, I really don't want to test how abrasion resistant the underlying fabric is, because it's not the most expensive raft in the world. As long as I don't take it over anything sharp or like super sandpapery in terms of rocks, I think I'll be good, but I don't want to test it. Let's put it that way. This is another one about the electric raft. I'm really unsure how to choose an electric motor and batteries, as I want to do inshore coastal waters and fish for mackerel. Any advice? So first of all, if you're in saltwater, you want to make sure that the trolling motor is rated for saltwater, because not all of them are. For example, the Minn Kota Endura C230 that I have on my electric raft, that cannot do saltwater. And that's why I pushed my Salish Sea Marine Trail out in BC trip to a couple of years from now, because I need to get a different trolling motor that is rated for saltwater. Other than that, you want to make sure that the voltage of the motor and the battery that you pair it up with match. So if you have a 12-volt motor, you want to have a 12-volt battery, you get the idea. And although I use lithium iron phosphate batteries for my build, you don't have to, strictly speaking. You can get away perfectly well with lead acid-based batteries. I don't personally recommend it because they have piss-poor lifespan, and if you draw too much amperage for them, they tend to crap out, and their charging time is ridiculously long by comparison. But if you need the absolute cheapest batteries that you can run your build with, yes, you can use sealed lead acid batteries. My personal recommendation is lithium iron phosphate batteries, because they're kind of like the perfect balance of everything. They have a ridiculously long lifespan. They're relatively inexpensive compared to high capacity lithium ion. They charge fast, they discharge fast. This one's about my electric skateboard. Love that you skate pack. Planning your charge locations and not just buying a bunch of batteries definitely seems more genuine. Unless I need to get bailed out because something went horribly awry and my wife needs to come and pick me up and take me home. Other than that, I am completely self-sufficient. And that's because before I go out on a trip, I plan the entire route out ahead of time. That includes charging locations, overnight accommodations, which includes potential stealth camp locations, campsites, and motels in the area, as well as places I can resupply to get food, water, and even outdoor equipment. And the entire route gets broken down into something I call legs, which is basically how far I can comfortably travel on whatever electric rideable I'm using before I need to stop and charge. So with my electric skateboard, that's about give or take every 40 kilometers. So every 40 kilometers, I'll have a pin dropped on my GPS map where I say, here's all the places I could potentially stay overnight, here's where I can get food, water. You get the picture. I already know there's several potential locations I could stop and charge because I've mapped that all out ahead of time. Another one about my electric raft. What is the length of the trolling motor? Is it a 30-inch or a 36-inch? So the Minn Kota that I have is the 30-inch. It's just barely long enough. I find that on max speed, it is churning the top of the water just a little bit, but I think if I had went with the 36-inch, it would have been a little bit too long, a little bit too unwieldy for the size of the raft that I have. It's a tough call, but I think the 30-inch is the right size. Another one about my electric skateboard, referencing why I put my battery case on the top of the skateboard instead of on the bottom. He asks, why do manufacturers put batteries on the bottom of them at all? It's not only less convenient, also the battery is then vulnerable to damage on the underside from gravel and stuff on the ground. And that's mostly because most people aren't trying to be dumb like me and use them to go backpacking. Now, the reason why they're kept on the underside is it keeps them down low and out of the way, keeps the top completely clear so that you don't trip on them. When I built my board, I actually had to train myself to not trip off the battery case in the middle. And also that's why I chose such a long 48.5-inch deck, is specifically so I would have more foot space accounting for that battery case in the middle. So that's one primary reason. And the other one is that it just keeps the center of gravity of the board super low and makes it harder to flip over. So this next one isn't about a specific electric rideable, but just more of a commentary on my trips on them in general. It says, great video, brother. My next adventure would be to go camping, backpacking with his e-scooter. Not going far, but he just wants to do it for the experience. And I love this comment because this is exactly one of the things I'm aiming to do with my channel. It's literally right there in my 3 mission statements. The first one is to prove that EVs are capable adventure vehicles. The second one is to innovate and find new ways to go adventuring with electric vehicles. And the third one is to inspire others to go on their own electric vehicle adventures. And this one is in reference to my electric skateboard. Dang, you're so fat. Very inspiring for the rest of us to get up out there to no excuses. How did you find a deck sturdy enough though? So between me and all of my backpacking gear, that's about 280 pounds. So I did need to have a pretty sturdy deck for my skateboard build. So I needed to handle all that weight. And like I said, I needed one with enough foot room to account for the top mounted battery case. And that's why ultimately I decided on my build to go with the loaded Bangra V2. Another one about my electric raft. What is the price of this device and how can it be purchased? Please guide me. So the whole build, give or take, is somewhere in the $1,300 to $1,400 Canadian mark. And then once I get the second battery to bump up my range to the target 50 kilometers, that'll push the price up by another few $100s. Another one about my electric skateboard. Does your board have regenerative braking? Yes, and pretty much any sort of electric rideable or electric vehicle that uses electric motors should, or at least be capable of, having regenerative braking, because regenerative braking isn't as complex as it sounds. It's literally just putting the electric motor in reverse. So even though you're going that way, you start applying to the motor in reverse, so it's trying to go that way. But because you still have a lot of momentum taking you this way, that momentum actually results in a net gain of power. It essentially turns your motor into a generator. My electric skateboard has it. The electric dirt surfer I just built has it. The electric rollerblades I'm buying have it. Both my Tesla Model 3 and my Nissan Leaf have it. Another one about my electric skateboard, he wants to know the specs. So the Eskate that I've had for a few years now, it's an onboard W2 kit strapped to a loaded Bangra V2 deck with a top-mounted battery case. 36-volt drivetrain. It's got 2 belt drive motors on the back. Each one's 500 watts, so a total of 1,000. 90mm wheels with a 62mm contact patch. And there's 78A durometer. Another one about the electric skateboard. I'm always surprised that you manage to ride with street wheels. I mean, you take on some pretty rocky terrain. So I'd be lying if I said I was comfortable doing that. It actually wears me down pretty significantly, doing miles and miles of gravel rail trail on a street board. But 2 factors let me do that. Number 1, I can suffer through a lot for you guys. And number 2, the wider wheels, the 62mm contact patch, helps me ramp up over top of the gravel rather than dig in between the individual rocks. Just a few millimeters of extra contact patch actually helps a lot. That and stopping to take frequent breaks helps a lot as well. And sometimes my feet get really numb to the point where I potentially get to the point where I can fall off the board because I can't feel anything. And for these sorts of situations, that's exactly why I built the electric dirt surfer. That thing will be a tank at all of those miles and miles of gravel rail trail on the Trans-Canada Trail. Well, that's all for this one. Hopefully you guys have had a little bit more insight into me and the adventures I go on. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to see all the adventures I get up to with all of my EVs, click the card.